George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation, celebrating people we feel good about. Well, we've got a clergy emergency response team in the house, and they're going to tell us how they do their work in the community, in particular, in this particular season, when we've been seeing unprecedented amounts of young people who have been impacted by gun violence. Joining us is Senior Pastor Derek T.H. Galloway of the Connected Christian Church of Syracuse. Welcome. Also joining us is the Reverend Marcus Jackson, the pastor of Hope Memorial Community Church, and Pastor David Harris of the First Baptist Church of Syracuse. Welcome to all of you. And I'll begin with you, Pastor Galloway. Tell me about the work that this group does.
Well, what we do is we attempt to provide an additional layer of support for individuals that are impacted by trauma, whether it be through responding to a fire and really being there as a secondary layer of consolation and relief for the families that have been impacted, whether it's through individuals impacted by gun violence or through stabbings, being able to be there and provide a faith level of support that sometimes is missing as they're going through their trauma. We realize that there are numerous organizations, but that faith component is something that's necessary. It can carry you through those darkest times. So that's what we're there to try to do.
And tell me, when are you called? Are you getting a beeper text? What's good? Beeper? We don't do that no more, right? So what do you get, a text message? I'm dating myself. So what do you get, a text message, and then you have scanners in your homes? What? How does this work?
Well, so
go ahead, Mark.
I'm the self-appointed dispatcher.
Okay.
And I was just thinking, it's interesting that as we start this interview here, we've just responded to a shooting up on the north side, not even an hour ago.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we get the calls, and I send a group text to the team, tell them what we are heading into and the address. And if any additional information is needed, we get that out there.
What happened to you, Pastor Jackson?
So, as everybody knows by now,
somebody doesn't know. Well, let me just tease them. You were shot at the hospital.
Yes.
Doing this work. What happened?
Pastor Harris and I, Sunday night was an extremely busy night for us. We've been running like all night. We had fires we had to go to, and Pastor Galloway was out of town on vacation. So the call came in that we had a suspected shooting. We had been told that the victim had possibly been shot in the head. So Pastor Harris responded to the hospital. When I arrived at the scene, the ambulance was leaving. So I let Pastor Harris know that ambulance was on the way to the hospital, and I'd meet him there. We get to the hospital. The other young folk who had accompanied the young man to the party were there. Pastor Harris and I were working with them, relaying necessary information to the police, trying to get in touch with the young man's parents, as we found that he wasn't from Syracuse. As we were relaying that information to the police, as I was relaying that information to the police, I heard a clap, felt a burn on my left arm, and just knew that I'd been hit. So I dropped down and crawled into the emergency room bay there, and Officer Patterson from the University Hospital Police, I owe him the utmost respect. He put himself in front of me in an open door and protected me, because I'm almost certain, and I think Pastor Harris can attest to, we believe we heard other shots even after that one. So they rushed me into the emergency room proper, and checked me out. I called Pastor Galloway, let him know what the situation was so that we're all on the same page. And that's it.
And you and then you showed up to work the next day.
Well, the next day was Monday. So
you had a day to recover, but you show him your arm. Yeah. And the beat goes on, right?
The beat goes on. Like I shared with someone, we are as pastors, you know, we say that we're called to service, that God has called us to this work. So, you know, we talk a lot about sacrifice and about duty and all of these great lofty things. And what better, I think, example of that? You know, I'm not trying to be a Superman. You know, I put on my pants the same way everybody else does. But if I truly believe that God has called me to this, then it's not about me, it's about the people. And I'm not hurt so bad that it stops me or prevents me from working. And we as Black men know that irregardless of what's going on at home, we still have bills to pay. Unless we get up and go to work, nobody else is going to pay these bills. So, yeah, I might would have liked to have, you know, laid down and cried, woe is me, but I don't have that luxury.
Understand. And I mean, just the notion of, is there any safe space, Pastor Harris, for, you would think, well, two things come to mind. Lucky they treated you, and I mean that because isn't, when people just walk in the door, it's very difficult, I guess. I don't know what I'm thinking of. Usually you have to be coming in by ambulance, I guess. I don't know, but people do walk into the ER. I guess that's okay. But
so I don't think I really walked into the emergency room. I was more like dragged in there. I mean,
okay.
So right at the door, there's a metal detector, and I was standing talking to a police officer. So when they fired at me, the police officer was in close proximity. So I guess I want to almost say they didn't have a choice but to bring me in. Like,
okay.
where else were they going to take me?
I understand that. And so, Pastor Harris, the idea that this happened while you were doing the work, quote unquote, of the Lord, it's got to be kind of unsettling.
Yeah, and it's always kind of important when we think about doing the work, thinking that we are doing this for the benefit and the betterment of the community. And so thinking about something happening while we were on duty, it is striking, it's shocking. It's been said a lot of times, or a couple of times in those past couple of days, thinking about and reflecting on what happened with the shooting, seeing the church, seeing the hospital as places of safe sanctuary where we don't expect or anticipate to see violence. But now that we've seen within the past decade or so, really kind of thinking about churches, but also now hospitals being a place where you are coming to find healing, to recover, but it shouldn't be the same place where you are damaged physically, you are impacted, you are shot at. And so it is becoming a question of where can you be safe if these places of safety are no longer seen as these isolated silos, but now are becoming targeted more and more often.
What is going on? And this is what all of you can jump in together. Start with you, Pastor Galloway. What is going on in the community right now that we, in the hospital, while we're helping people get healed, we have a pastor shot at the same time? What is there? What has changed? What's the mindset? What's happening today that this sort of thing can happen in our community?
Well, one of the things that I look at is our community has shifted. It used to be that if there was a shooting or if there was anything that went on, it would typically be, you know, young adults to adults that were involved in this. Now we're seeing our victims as well as our alleged assailants as being younger and younger. So our community has shifted. There are times when you look at, you know, the look in the eyes of some of the young people, and they may seem a bit despondent. They may seem as if they are somewhat detached. And I really feel that until we as a community get back to being a community, recognizing that a community is just a group that has a common unity, we're going to continue to see this spate of violence that's been going on. We've lost some of the direction because now, you know, we're at a point, I don't know about you, but I know for me, I was brought up that your community was able to, you know, discipline you, to pour into you, to give you guidance, to give you direction. We no longer have that. We don't have those griots that are able to tell us the stories about where we came from. We don't have, quote unquote, those OGs that are there to say, hey, young fella, this is what we do and this is what we don't do. That entire middle section of safety, that buffering has been removed. So now we have a generation that they're not afraid to shoot. They're not afraid of the consequences until the consequences come. So I really feel like there's been a shifting in the community, and there's been just a change that is very disheartening. Is very disheartening. And I know, coming up in on the south side of Syracuse, I love the south side. I
Mhm.
pastor on the south side. My family still lives on the south side. I'm a product of the projects. Grew up in pioneer homes and raised my older kids in Central Village. So I saw the change. I still see where there's just not a community like it used to be. And we need to get back to that, or else we're going to continue to see this rash of violence until we finally say enough is enough.
And yet, Pastor Jackson, we have more programs than we've ever had. We have more people in leadership and key positions than we've ever had. We in place. We're on the Board of Education. We're from a policy standpoint. If we look at that, we're in a city council. We're all over in terms of leadership in our community. So where did this breakdown happen as far as you can see? And how do we lose that buffer, if you will, of support? Because that's that analysis that you gave, Pastor Galloway, as I think about it, I haven't heard it described that way, right? The buffer of being able to, now the discipline is a whole other thing, but being able to at least say, young man, that ain't right, go over here and do something else, right? You don't know what they're going to do if you say that, is what I'm hearing you say, because it hasn't been passed down, or in some instances, or at least it hasn't been passed down in this population who is committing the violence. Let's say it that way, right? So that we're real clear about that. So, Reverend Pastor Marcus, what do we do? How do we get here?
I say often that we see a group of folk. Well, years ago we talk about the great migration, where those folk, our elders who wanted better lives, left the South and came north. And now we see that especially like in Syracuse on the west and the south side, where folk that got those good jobs want their kids to go to good schools, they head out of town. And so they leave those who are unable to escape to scratch for survival with what's left, the dross that falls from the table. I tell us that those of us who have 15 cents over lunch money have an obligation to reach back and pull a brother and sister up. And I tell folk that the book says, we're all faith leaders, the four of us that do this. The book says that our people, my people, that without knowledge or without a vision, they perish. And we see a whole generation, the generation that Pastor Galloway talked about, with no vision, with nothing to live for, no dream. All of these great sayings come to mind that we emulate those people we admire. Who are our young people emulating? The rappers, the folk, that we see on TV, and it's taught that if you want this type of lifestyle, this is how you get there. And and we know that this generation was lied to. They said if you go to school, get a good education, you'll get a good job, and this, that, and the other. And the younger folk coming up saw that that's not necessarily true. You get a good grades, you get a good education, and come out, you're stuck with student loan, you still have no job. So what do we do? What do we do?
Yeah,
we've just given up. They've just given up.
Yeah, but I'm making the point that, and yet we have more resources. We have more resources than we ever had. We've got a new police athletic league. We got all these things. And so I'm trying to figure out, and maybe Pastor Harris, you can help me as the newbie on the block here, right? And by the way, how did you get to Syracuse?
So I did my both undergraduate studies and my master's studies in Ohio. And so when I was looking for pastoral opportunities once I finished graduate school, New York kind of reached out to me. I interviewed for a position further upstate and kind of didn't get that position. So they kind of kept me on speed dial. And then the church opened up here in Syracuse. That was a more perfect fit. And everything fell into place. They accepted me unanimously, and here I am 2 years strong.
I appreciate that. And I have to say, and I ain't gonna lie about it, I was like, whose son is this on y'all know, I ain't the only boy that ever said that to you, Pastor Harris.
No, I've gotten as young as 13, 14. It was funny when we were at the hospital, one of the African-American police officers thought that I was actually Reverend or Pastor Marcus's son. So that was a whole laugh. But yes.
God bless you, brother. You look, I was like, well, who's this young teenager? So I did it too in my head. So I just wanted to acknowledge that so we know. So given that your youthful appearance anyway, right? There's two things that I wanted to get in here. So given that we have more resources than we ever have, why isn't it that those resources aren't connecting to those individuals that need them the most? Because I hear this all the time. We don't have enough. We don't have this. And then I'm looking around where programs are looking for young people to be involved in them, and they're looking for people to sign up. And so either there's a disconnect, either we're not offering the right programs, because there's a whole lot of them that seem to be looking for young people, and it's very difficult, I guess, to get people to do what it is that they don't want to do. Or I don't know, but maybe you can help me with that, Pastor Harris.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of a double-edged sword. On one hand, you look at kind of the resources that are coming in, and they're being earmarked for programs. And so we have to look at the programs. Who are they reaching out to? Who are those who are responsible? Who are the stakeholders that are responsible for the distribution of those funds? If the youth that they are trying to reach are not coming, then maybe you have to reevaluate kind of the programming and say, is this a feasible, viable option that is going to be effective in the long term? Whereas instead of just doing the program year after year and seeing declining kind of enrollment or kind of the retention rate, kind of really address and see, are the programs or the resources that we're providing to these communities, are they actually reaching those communities? And so I've been thinking over the past kind of couple of days, thinking about, we have all these programs set in place. We have basketball leagues, but are the individuals that are promoting these acts of violence, are those that are doing the violence, are they the ones that are actually within the sphere of reach of these programs, to where they would actually, one, be approached by these programs, but two, have an interest in these programs? I know Pastor Galloway talked, a little bit, just kind of hey, basketball league is great, but who's, that has been tried and tested, that's been done before. What is the effectiveness of that? And thinking now that we're in a new day and age, we can't rely on older programming for a newer generation to a community that, if we're saying that it takes a village to raise a child, what happens when the village has been ransacked, the resources of the village have been taken and being used to promote programming, not just in other communities and other neighborhoods within Syracuse, but oftentimes kind of taken to the suburban areas. And we see those programs, which further leaves the inner city kind of vying for fewer and fewer resources that they really don't see are coming to them. And so it's all a reevaluation process that I think needs to happen, particularly as we think about how we can find ways of violence prevention, violence kind of re-intervention, and take a look at what's working, what's actually working, and what the community actually needs, instead of, hey, we have these things that worked 10, 15, 20 years ago. Let's see if we can repeat the hamster wheel.
We're talking with members of the Clergy Emergency Response Team, Pastor David Harris, Pastor Mark Jackson, and Pastor Derek Galloway. And how do you differ from the trauma response team where other within the community? Are you like different, the same, another thing? What? Talk to me, Derek. Pastor
All right.
Derek.
Here's what I'll explain. And I got to frame this the right way. So there are tons of programs that are available. You are correct. Now, here's the thing. their programs are available, but they may not be, as David said, earmarked for the people that need them the most. One of our Common Council candidates has gotten 1,000 jobs for kids in the community. Phenomenal, because their community is still rallying behind them. So when it comes to us, there are several layers, right? So the trauma response team or Street Addiction Institute has somewhat shifted a little bit, because they're realizing that instead of responding to the traumas on scene all the time, what happens if we catch them earlier and change the trajectory that they're going? So instead of responding in a reactionary standpoint, that they can be, more shifting that focus, and they're being very successful in that. There's also other organizations in the area that are responding. Our whole purpose is not to supplant anyone. It's just to be an additional layer of support when it comes time for these families to go through this trauma process. One of the things that people don't seem to realize is, if you go through something, eventually you're going to respond based off of the trauma you've experienced. I was talking with someone today at a reception, and I was explaining that I witnessed the fact that I had a trauma response based off of what I went through up until the age of 30. Like I said, I'm local to the area. I've been in this area since I was 8 years old. I've grown up around the same people that were these OGs. And, let me frame this the right way. When everyone first started really catching heavy jail sentences in 1994.
Right, the part of the RICO?
This is before RICO.
Before that, okay.
This is pre-RICO. So when everyone began catching these heavy federal sentences, what it did is it removed that first layer of the OGs, out. But they had already poured in, to that next layer. So what ends up happening, you fast forward to 2002, 2003, 2004, and continuing on with the RICO Act, and you take that next layer that understood the rules and you take them out. Now, I was sitting in a meeting with some political officials, and they indicated that that was a mistake, because now there's no guardians of the gate explaining what ends up happening. So, instead of us, looking, as David said, at what happened 20 years ago, SJTPA was great when I was younger.
Hold on, that's the Syracuse Job Training Partnership Agency. Go.
Right. That was great when I was younger, but now, the funding wasn't there. And you're correct, George, we have we're in a lot of key positions, but a lot of times our hands are still tied, when it comes down to passing out and diffusing some of these resources to the areas most hard hit and getting them to the people that really need it the most. So when it comes down for a Street Addiction Institute, when it comes down for a clergy emergency response team, or another team that I partner with, the gun violence program, SNUG, we're able to do certain things, but we still have limitations, because what we do is different than a police athletic league with Jimmy Oliver and the Syracuse Police Department. It's different. Our focus is different. By the time it gets to us, it's already gotten to the point where somebody is either a victim of or a perpetrator of gun violence or a crime in this area. So I really believe that all these layers are needed. Every aspect, whether it's a Good Life Foundation, whether it's street addiction, whether it's SNUG, whether it's CERT, all of these areas, all of these levels are needed at different areas of that trauma when it comes in. It's necessary. So again, we don't supplant, we support.
No, I appreciate you saying that. And I love how you said let me translate that, if I will, or not even translate. Let me reframe it or say it in a way that maybe just to reiterate. Let me reiterate. What you basically saying is that every voice counts. And we all bring something different, because we're all fighting the same battle. We all want the best for our children. We all want the best for our community. And I'll add this, that you didn't say this, it's no need in us bickering and fighting each other for this, because we're trying to do the work and we're trying to save our kids. And so while it might appear as though we're fighting for the same set of resources, what I heard you say that implied in that is there's room for everybody, because I'm using metaphorical we're all trying to do the work of improving our community and provide opportunities for our youth. Did I hear that implied right?
You reiterated that perfectly, and I really appreciate that. Again, for us, one of the things is because I do, bridge kind of the gap with everybody, because I am, partnered with Snug and one of the co-coordinators with CERT, and still have connections with some of the other organizations. We can all laugh, joke, break bread together because we're all here doing the work.
Mhm.
And we're all here for the same purpose. So here's the interesting thing. We always have to be careful to maintain the fidelity of our narrative.
Mhm.
What ends up happening is media, not you, George Kilpatrick, king of all media in Central New York, but media and other individuals a lot of times will want to shift the narrative that, oh, there's a new group. No, it's not about a new group. It's about whether or not we all have different levels of capacity. And what we're doing is, again, just where our capacity is as faith leaders.
Mhm.
As faith leaders to go and to pray and to be able to support, not to supplant. And this is the thing where we need to control the fidelity of our narrative. We need to make sure that the pen of this story is in the right hands. Because a lot of times what happens is the pen will get in the wrong hands, and the picture that's painted or the story that's written is not the story that becomes the truth. It
Mm.
becomes history, and we know exactly what his story shapes up to be. It doesn't show the unification that all of us are working to try to better our community, to save our children, and to do the work that we've all been called to in whatever capacity we've been called to it.
So some people would say, Pastor Marcus, well, y'all are the church and y'all got some youngins. What's up with that? Why isn't where has the church failed? Let me ask that question, because I have to put that on the table. Now, a lot of the faith leaders who are listening, or they ain't listening, but if they are, they'll say, we're doing all of these things, bro. Don't trip. Okay, got it. But it feels like that to some folk. What's up with that?
The one thing the pandemic has taught us is that we have had to reimagine church. And along with that, the four of us, the group of us, have had to reimagine ministry. The shooting of Rite Aid caused Pastor Galloway and I to begin having a conversation on how we, as faith leaders in this community who are experiencing these different layers and have experienced these different layers of trauma, could be effective. How can we help our people? Because, I've said it before, we say that we've been called by a higher power to be shepherds, to guide, to protect, these folks. So how are we doing that? The pandemic forced us to reimagine that. So I can't speak for church with the big C. I can only speak for what God has, I feel that God has told me, Galloway, Harris, and Ogletree. And that's to do the work that we're doing. Other men and women of God, they do what they feel or believe God has called them to do. And I can't, speak to that.
And it's all necessary. That's the thing. If you're taking care of your portion of the garden, because the garden is huge.
Okay.
If you're taking care of your portion of the garden and your youth are not out committing crimes and acts of gun violence, are not out becoming victims, then you're doing a great job. Never discount that. So the church itself has not failed. Our community has shifted. And as Marcus said so eloquently, we have had to reimagine exactly what it meant to be the church.
And you think COVID forced us to do that?
I think that I really believe in my heart of hearts that yes, COVID forced us to reevaluate the effectiveness of whether or not we were doing the work. Everybody gets behind that sacred desk on Sunday and gives a great sermon and gives hope and does all these great inspiring things. But when you were not able to do that, for those of us that chose to close our doors during the pandemic, what are you going to do? Are you going to sit at home and watch old reruns of Big Ten football? No. What you're going to do is you're going to honor your calling. You're going to go and think, how can I serve my community? Because this is my calling. How can I serve my community? For us, what we did is not only did we go out and work with the clergy emergency response team and deal with the rash of violence that had occurred. It slowed down a bit during the pandemic, but many of our churches opened up feeding programs they had never had before.
Mm-hmm.
So again, the church has not failed. Our community has shifted. We've shifted, and now it's time for us to realign back where we need to be at in order to save our community. The big picture is we got to save our community by whatever methodology God puts in your heart. So again, a lot of these churches are doing great work, community days, feeding programs. They've opened up their doors as vaccination clinics. We've all had to reimagine what it meant to be called of God.
Pastor David Harris, and all of you can answer this. I did ask, so you've done a lot of interviews related to the incident with Marcus. You talked about safe spaces, but I said to Marcus, Pastor Marcus, what do you want the community to know and do now? So I'll start with you, Pastor David. What y'all want folk to do and know?
I think kind of first, I mean, obviously the biggest thing is kind of stop the violence. That's been the push we've heard it from various pulpits, platforms. Older members have said it, elders within the community have said, stop the violence. It's becoming a place where we are dealing with this other epidemic that we're dealing with in the midst of our global pandemic. We're seeing this rise in violence and crime. And so how can we tend to our tribe, tend to our village, working together? How can we really come together, know that we're all doing the work, even though it might look different based upon our different circumstances, situations, programming, whether the title is, this, that, or the other. We are all doing the work. And so how can we come together as a community, as people who are speaking about the same issue, but it's seemingly trying to kind of take credit within our individual silos rather than recognize the credit that we're all working together doing the same cause. So kind of this call for doing the work together, really breaking down all of these separate identities. Oh, I'm championing this program, which is great and all for it. But right now we need to champion our youth, and we should be lifting them up first and foremost. And whatever program that involves, whatever work that we can do, whatever work that those listening can do, that's our first and top priority.
Okay. Who's next? Pastor Galloway.
Well, basically what I want to be next steps is to realize that it's going to take all of us. It's going to take all of us coming out of, and I love the term silos, it's going to take all of us coming down out of our silos, coming down out of our towers. It's going to take all of us coming together, sitting down as they just did the other day and saying, what can we do together? Because ultimately enough is enough and we are better together. Again, being a product of this environment, knowing the trappings, knowing exactly what ends up coming out, knowing that bullets obviously have no name, knowing that jail sentences can be passed out easily. We really need to get to a point where we as a community say enough is enough. It's funny because, again, talking about the media, they want to paint a picture that that our elected officials aren't doing enough. They're doing what they've been elected to do. They're officiating and governing our government. But when it comes to our community, we need to step into our communities. We need to break down some of these barriers with the police and make sure that those officers that are trying to be in the community, that we're supporting them because they're trying to make a difference as well. So we need to get to the point where we recognize it and we collectively say, we're going to do something about it.
Pastor Marcus.
Yeah, I shared with someone earlier, I hear oftentimes in these conversations, folk talk about save our youth. We need to do this. We need to do that to our youth. But as I share with folk, I was raised in the South and I was raised by a single parent. My grandmother raised me. And what my first school, I got my first education, my most meaningful, lasting education at home. So unless we start working the home and get the home straight, we're going to continue to have these issues in the street, because folk like to throw out these big words like gangs and stuff like that. But what we're finding is a whole group of folk, a whole subculture, a whole, Pastor Galloway mentioned it earlier. We have folk seeking acceptance. And so they go to the streets for what we call external affirmation, just wanting to fit in, wanting to belong. And because they're not getting that at home. So I think if we fix the home and create
how do we do that? How do we do that? Because I want to know how we do that.
Well,
how do we do that?
Like Pastor Galloway said, go ahead, Rev.
All right. Fixing the home, we got to create areas of opportunity, and this is the thing. As we begin to look at what's going to go on, we as community leaders need to stop playing the short game. Mm-hmm. We need to begin to look at the long game and where Syracuse is going over the next 10 to 15 years. So we're creating areas of opportunity. We're getting back and putting our support in areas that are going to create jobs, in areas that are going to create training, because life itself cannot exist in a vacuum. If you take something out, then you're going to need to put something in, or else something is going to look to fill it on its own. So if we say we don't want you in the streets, well, what are you going to do besides that? I made $1,000 last night. What are you offering? Or I get X amount of dollars, doing whatever it is I do. What are you going to offer? So we need to create areas of opportunity. Once those areas of opportunity are created, you give people something to look forward to. You give them a hope. You give them, as the Bible says, an expected end, because that's what God has for us. So once you've gotten that in order, they begin to pass down that information. They begin to pass down all of those things that they were missing that now they have access to. In my generation, we talked about going to work every day, punching the clock. We didn't talk about credit. We didn't talk about financial acumen. We didn't talk about any of that. But now I'm pouring that into my children. My daughter and I were having conversations about stock splitting. So I'm pouring that information in so that when they get older, they're now pouring it. We're breaking the cycle. We're now pouring that information in. And that's how you fix the home. You fix the home by replacing what's there with something more positive. And once you replace it, it then trickles down. Because right now, what's trickled down for the last 40 years has been drug culture. It's been degradation. It's been, not really having the family structure intact. That's what's been going on. Marcus mentioned the Great Migration. That was one of the most destructive things, because what ends up happening is when people came up to this area for these good jobs, war hits. Now you take the man out of the home, and once the man is out of the home, the government says, we'll take care of you as long as there's no man in the home. So during that time frame, what ends up happening is we're taking care of you, but what happens when Bubba Ray comes home? Bubba Ray's not needed. Now Bubba Ray is despondent. He's not passing down that information. He's not passing down the knowledge of what it means to be a family man. And that structure is now broken. And so in order for us to replace what has systemically been destroyed generationally, we need to replace it with something positive. We got to break the systemic and purposeful curses that have been put on our community.
And a big component of that, George, I know you've got to go, but a big piece of that, and I just want to mention this, is get rid of the stigma around mental health. We, as a people of color, we are dealing with 400 plus years of stuff, somebody else's stuff, that compounded with our stuff. And society hasn't given us the freedom or permission to talk about it and to receive the healing that we need in order to move forward. So I think if we start talking openly about mental health and how important that is, we'll make some strides in the right direction.
Some things.
I appreciate that, Pastor Marcus Jackson, pastor of Hope Memorial Community Church. And I'll leave you. What do you need from the community? Is there a way to support the work you're doing, the CERT team, or just when they see y'all, give you a high five? I want to know what do you need from the community?
Actually, I'll say this, just making sure that they know that we're there.
Okay.
When it comes to the organizations that are already in place, You know, we are operating from a zero funding standpoint. We do it because this is the calling that we have.
Mhm.
So what we're really looking at is just for people to realize there's other layers of support available. Take advantage of it. You know, let us know what you need. If you need connecting with services, we can do that. Reverend Marcus is connected in the community when it comes to dealing with mental health. Take advantage of that. You know, I'm connected when it comes to dealing with, you know, the gun violence and dealing with insurance and things along that line. Take advantage of that. We're here to support and to build our community just like anybody else. And that acknowledgement is really what we're looking for more than anything else, that we're here for our community. And the community has responded in kind by showing their appreciation already. When a family member, when I walk into a store and there's a young man whose brother we responded to the hospital who had been shot in the chest, and he says, "You were there for my brother when nobody else was there. I want to thank you."
Amen.
That's what we're there for.
Senior Pastor Derek T.H. Galloway, the connected Christian Church of Syracuse. And Pastor David, any final thoughts?
Yeah, just kind of thinking about all of us kind of when we do this work, knowing that kind of it's a need. We're hoping to really change the dynamics within the city of Syracuse. I don't want to, turn this into a preaching segment because, it's midweek and I'm still working on Sunday. But so many of our youth are at a place where they are feeling as though they're at a breaking point. And so we feel as, Sir Team, I want to start preaching, like we have to be the blessing point in terms of helping, giving to the community, being a presence, being a positive presence, so that as we pour out, as those who provide these services, as those who provide these programs, we reach out and reach down, really lifting up the youth within our community, giving them a place where they can feel as though they belong. And I think that will be the way that Syracuse kind of, we put the U back in Syracuse when truly all of the U's are taken care of.
All right, that is Pastor David Harris for the First Baptist Church of Syracuse. And don't let him fool you. He is one of those young people, but that's a whole nother story. From my vantage point, anyway. Thank you all for this clergy emergency response team, Pastor Reverend Marcus Jackson, Pastor of Hope Memorial Community Church, Senior Pastor Derek T.H. Galloway, the Connected Christian Church of Syracuse, and the First Baptist Church of Syracuse, Pastor David Harris. Thank you all. Keep up the good work. And, look, we may not solve this problem today, but we're going to keep working on it until we do. Inspiration for the nation. Okay, gentlemen,